The order was delivered just after dawn, deep inside Sandringham House, where even longtime staff reportedly froze in stunned silence. Access codes were changed, private doors were sealed, and according to palace whispers, Queen Camilla was quietly informed that one of the estate's most protected residential wings was no longer hers to enter. What began as a routine security adjustment quickly exploded into something far more dangerous, a royal confrontation that insiders claim Prince William had been preparing for months. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, aides allegedly attempted to dismiss the entire situation as a minor internal reshuffling, the kind of quiet administrative adjustment that rarely escapes the thick stone walls of royal estates. But Sandringham was never an ordinary residence. Those familiar with the traditions surrounding the estate insist it occupies a deeply personal place within the monarchy's sacred geography, a sanctuary tied not only to Christmas gatherings and royal retreats, but to the emotional legacy Queen Elizabeth II reportedly protected with extraordinary caution during the final years of her reign. That was why the sudden restriction order sent such shockwaves through palace corridors. It was not simply about access to a wing. It was about authority, control, and the growing belief that Prince William had quietly decided the future of the monarchy could no longer tolerate blurred lines of influence while King Charles battled ongoing health struggles behind closed doors. Reports suggest the changes happened rapidly, almost surgically. Security teams allegedly received instructions late in the night, long after most senior household staff had retired. Updated credentials were issued before sunrise. Internal schedules were revised. Certain doors that had remained open to select members of the royal circle for years were reportedly placed under new protocols tied directly to William's office. One insider would later describe the atmosphere as cold and irreversible, claiming even veteran staff members sensed immediately that this was no temporary disagreement. Something fundamental had shifted inside the House of Windsor. And perhaps most revealing of all was the speed. There were reportedly no prolonged negotiations, no ceremony. Onio consultations, no attempts at public smoothing. According to whispers circulating through palace administrative circles, William wanted the message understood instantly and without confusion. For months, rumors had quietly circulated about worsening tensions between the Prince of Wales and Queen Camilla's inner circle. While public appearances continued with carefully rehearsed unity, insiders claimed deeper fractures had been widening beneath the surface for over a year. Different interpretations of palace meetings describe William becoming increasingly protective over royal residences, estate operations, and long-term succession planning as King Charles's condition continued to dominate private discussions. Sandringham, in particular, allegedly became a sensitive point of concern. Sources familiar with estate traditions suggest William viewed the property not as personal real estate, but as a sacred trust held temporarily by each generation for the survival of the institution itself. That philosophy reportedly placed him on a collision course with figures he believed were becoming too comfortable treating royal access as informal entitlement rather than earned stewardship. And did it not only William who appeared unsettled? Reports indicate several senior aides were blindsided by the sheer severity of the move, with some allegedly fearing the restriction order could trigger broader divisions inside the royal household at a moment the monarchy could least afford instability. Camilla's allies were reportedly left shaken, uncertain whether the action represented a temporary disciplinary measure or the opening phase of something far larger. Some insiders even whispered that the decision carried traces of Princess Anne's influence, describing an emerging alliance among senior royals determined to preserve what they privately call the old framework of royal discipline before the next reign officially begins. Whether those claims are true remains impossible to confirm. But what cannot be ignored is the growing sense that William has begun operating with a confidence far more forceful than many expected. Media commentators initially treated the story cautiously, aware of the explosive implications surrounding any suggestion of internal warfare between the future king and the current queen. Yet behind the scenes, palace insiders reportedly viewed the Sandringham order as something much more serious than a family disagreement. According to several interpretations circulating within royal circles, this was the first visible strike in a broader institutional power shift already unfolding behind closed doors, an unmistakable signal that the era of quiet tolerance was ending, that the monarchy's future custodians were beginning to draw hard lines around legacy, loyalty, and control. And as whispers intensified across Britain's press establishment, one chilling question quietly emerged from within the palace itself. If Prince William was willing to restrict access to one of the monarchy's most emotionally symbolic estates now, what else might he be prepared to do next? But behind the sealed doors of Sandringham lay an even older conflict, one rooted not in personalities, but in legacy, inheritance, and the silent promises Queen Elizabeth reportedly left behind. Sandringham was never simply a country estate. For generations, it stood as one of the emotional anchors of the monarchy, a sanctuary where royal history unfolded far from the cameras. Yet, insiders now suggest that beneath its polished halls and winter traditions, a quiet territorial war had been unfolding for years. And by early 2026, that invisible war was reportedly impossible to contain. Long before the current crisis erupted behind palace gates, Sandringham had already become something far greater than land, wealth, or royal comfort. Those familiar with the estate's long history often describe it as the emotional heartbeat of the House of Windsor itself, a place deeply intertwined with memory, continuity, and survival. Purchased during the reign of Queen Victoria and expanded under King Edward VII, the Norfolk estate evolved into far more than a seasonal retreat. It became a private world where monarchs escaped public performance and dealt with the burdens of power away from official ceremonies. That emotional significance only intensified during Queen Elizabeth II's reign. Reports suggest she viewed Sandringham not simply as property belonging to the crown, but as part of what aides privately called the sacred geography of the British monarchy, a place where the institution could reconnect with its oldest instincts during moments of uncertainty. And according to insiders, that is precisely why the growing battle over control of the estate became so explosive. Behind closed doors. In the years following the late Queen's passing, palace dynamics reportedly began shifting in ways many longtime staff members found deeply unsettling. Publicly, the monarchy projected calm unity after the sun-drenched coronation of 2023. But inside royal administrative circles, whispers of tension allegedly grew louder with each passing month. Sources familiar with palace operations claim Prince William became increasingly protective over access to certain sections of Sandringham, particularly those tied to private family traditions, restricted gatherings, and historically sensitive areas connected to Queen Elizabeth's final years. Various interpretations of his behavior describe a future king already preparing mentally for a reign shaped not by celebration, but by preservation. Preservation of boundaries, preservation of authority, preservation of what he reportedly viewed as the monarchy's fragile moral structure during King Charles's declining health battles. At the center of those concerns, insiders claim, stood Queen Camilla's expanding influence inside the royal household. While she had long secured her public position beside Charles, reports suggest. The years after the coronation dramatically strengthened the confidence of her personal circle as well. Palace whispers increasingly referenced private entertaining arrangements, evolving guest privileges, and informal social networks allegedly extending deeper into royal estates than some members of the old guard found comfortable. It was not necessarily a matter of open confrontation at first. In fact, several insiders described the tension as subtle, almost invisible to outsiders. But subtle changes inside ancient institutions often carry enormous consequences. Certain aides reportedly feared a gradual shift of influence toward the Parker Bowles side of the family, particularly as questions surrounding succession planning and long-term royal authority quietly intensified behind palace walls. For William, according to those close to the situation, the issue was never purely personal. It was institutional. Reports suggest he viewed Sandringham as a symbolic fortress tied directly to the continuity of the crown itself, especially after witnessing how carefully Queen Elizabeth controlled access, hierarchy, and protocol throughout her 70-year reign. That belief allegedly pushed him closer towards senior figures like Princess Anne and Prince Edward, both of whom were rumored to share deep anxieties about preserving traditional structures before the next royal transition officially begins. Anne, often described by palace insiders as the monarchy's iron enforcer, reportedly believed the family had already drifted dangerously close to allowing informal loyalties to overshadow institutional discipline. Edward, meanwhile, was said to support stricter stewardship policies regarding royal residences and private estate operations. Together, whispers suggest, they formed a quiet but increasingly determined alliance around William as tensions inside Sandringham escalated. And behind the scenes, discussions surrounding authority reportedly became sharper, colder, and more unforgiving. Who could host private guests? Who could approve extended stays? Who ultimately controlled access to the estate's most protected residential sections? These questions may have appeared minor to the outside world, but within royal circles they carried enormous symbolic weight. Because in the monarchy, access has always meant power. The ability to open doors often reveals who truly controls the institution itself. And according to palace administrative whispers, one particular disagreement inside Sandringham's private wing allegedly transformed months of simmering distrust into something impossible to reverse. A moment that insiders now describe as the spark that pushed Prince William toward decisive action. And according to those familiar with palace administrative circles, one private incident inside the Sandringham wing may have triggered everything that followed. It was described by one insider as the moment the atmosphere inside the monarchy fundamentally shifted. No public announcement was made. No official statement was released. Yet palace staff reportedly understood immediately that a line had been crossed and that Prince William's patience had finally collapsed. According to whispers circulating through royal administrative circles, the confrontation began with what initially appeared to be a routine discussion, involving the use of several private rooms inside Sandringham's protected residential wing. But those rooms were no ordinary guest spaces. Sources familiar with the estate claim they carried enormous symbolic importance within the royal household, tied to historic family gatherings, confidential meetings, and even carefully preserved archives connected to Queen Elizabeth II's final years. Access to those areas had reportedly always been governed through unwritten understandings passed quietly between generations of senior royals. That was why the alleged disagreement sent such shockwaves through palace staff. It was not merely a logistical dispute over accommodation or scheduling. It was interpreted by some insiders as a challenge to boundaries the monarchy had treated as untouchable for decades. Reports suggest that tension escalated after discussions surrounding future guests. Arrangements and extended access privileges reportedly surfaced behind closed doors. Different interpretations of the incident exist, but several palace whispers describe William reacting with unusual severity after learning of informal planning connected to Sandringham's inner residential spaces. According to insiders, the future king viewed the matter not as harmless social administration, but as a dangerous erosion of institutional discipline at a moment when the monarchy was already vulnerable. King Charles's health struggles had reportedly intensified. Fears inside the palace about instability, succession pressures, and competing centers of influence. And for William, sources claim, the idea that sacred royal territory could slowly drift into blurred personal authority represented something far more serious than family tension. It represented risk, a slow weakening of the structure his grandmother spent decades protecting. Those close to estate operations whisper that the atmosphere following the disagreement became icy and irreversible. Staff members allegedly noticed an immediate hardening in William's tone during internal discussions surrounding estate governance. Meetings reportedly grew shorter, more controlled. Certain aides who once moved freely between royal offices allegedly found themselves navigating an environment shaped by caution and silence rather than trust. And at the center of the storm stood Queen Camilla, whose growing confidence after the coronation reportedly convinced some within her circle that broader informal influence over estate matters had become natural and expected. Insiders claim Camilla believed her role as queen granted her greater flexibility regarding guest privileges, household arrangements, and private estate operations. But according to palace whispers, William fundamentally rejected that interpretation. For the Prince of Wales, sources suggest the issue centered on custodianship rather than entitlement. He reportedly argued behind closed doors that royal estates did not belong to individuals, regardless of rank or marriage, but to the institution itself. Sandringham, Balmoral, and other royal sanctums were viewed not as personal rewards attached to status, but as protected foundations of continuity that had to remain insulated from shifting alliances and social factions. Several insiders claim William repeatedly emphasized that future generations would inherit these responsibilities long after current tensions faded. And within that philosophy lay the deeper fracture dividing the palace. One side allegedly viewed royal authority through evolving modern relationships and influence. The other viewed it through rigid stewardship, ancient protocol, and the belief that the crown must always stand above personal loyalties. Princess Anne reportedly understood the danger immediately. Various interpretations from those close to the royal household suggest she privately advised William to act swiftly before uncertainty hardened into precedent. Anne, often described as the monarchy's ultimate institutional guardian, allegedly feared that hesitation would only encourage further challenges surrounding estate authority and succession boundaries. Prince Edward was also rumored to support firmer controls, particularly regarding access to historically sensitive areas connected to Queen Elizabeth's legacy. Together, whispers suggest, they reinforced William's growing belief that decisive intervention was no longer avoidable. Meanwhile, courtiers reportedly feared the dispute could spread far beyond Sandringham itself. Questions surrounding inheritance structures, estate governance, future residency rights, and even symbolic authority within the next reign allegedly began surfacing in quiet palace conversations. Some insiders warned privately that if these tensions remained unresolved, they could evolve into a far broader institutional struggle during one of the monarchy's most fragile modern chapters. And perhaps most unsettling of all was the growing realization among staff that William no longer appeared interested in compromise. The future king, according Ding to those watching closely, had already crossed an invisible line inside his own mind, one from which there would likely be no return. But the real shock came days later, when palace security systems reportedly activated a protocol no one expected William to use so soon. By the time the security notices were circulated internally, the decision had already been made. There would be no negotiations, no ceremonial discussions, no gradual transition. According to insiders, Prince William had activated what aides privately began calling an Iron Protocol, a bureaucratic counteroffensive designed to reclaim control before the monarchy slipped into deeper internal division. The speed of the operation reportedly stunned even experienced palace officials. Sources familiar with internal procedures claim keycard permissions tied to Sandringham's protected residential areas were altered within hours, bypassing the slow layers of consultation that traditionally define royal administration. Access clearances were allegedly reviewed overnight. Staff movement logs were quietly updated. Certain residential privileges that had existed for years were reportedly frozen pending institutional assessment, a phrase insiders say carried far heavier implications than the public would ever realize. Those who witnessed the changes unfold describe an atmosphere filled not with chaos, but with cold precision. That detail mattered, because according to palace whispers, William did not want this interpreted as emotional retaliation. He wanted it understood as governance. Administrative teams across multiple royal offices allegedly received instructions to reroute future estate approvals directly through channels tied to the Prince of Wales's private staff. Reports suggest longtime household officials immediately recognized what this meant. The structure of authority surrounding Sandringham was being rewritten in real time, quietly, surgically, without public confrontation. Security personnel were reportedly placed under strict confidentiality directives, with several insiders claiming internal communications surrounding the estate became unusually restricted even by royal standards. Some staff members allegedly compared the atmosphere to a containment operation where information itself had become tightly controlled. And behind every whispered conversation inside palace corridors toed the same unsettling realization. William was no longer behaving like a cautious heir waiting patiently beside the throne. He was beginning to act like a monarch already preparing the ground beneath his future reign. What made the situation even more explosive was William's reported insistence on separating family emotion from institutional governance. According to sources close to palace operations, he had grown increasingly frustrated by what he allegedly viewed as blurred boundaries between personal relationships and crown stewardship. Those familiar with his thinking claimed the future king believed emotional compromise had become one of the monarchy's greatest vulnerabilities during King Charles's weakened condition. That belief reportedly hardened after the Sandringham dispute escalated. Palace insiders whisper that William began framing the issue not as conflict with Camilla personally, but as a larger test of whether royal estates would continue operating according to centuries' protocol or drift into informal influence shaped by competing loyalties and private social circles. Princess Anne was reportedly among the first senior royals to align behind the move. Various interpretations from palace insiders describe her viewing the situation through the lens of institutional survival rather than family harmony. Anne allegedly believed the monarchy had entered a dangerous period where hesitation could permanently weaken royal authority for future generations. Prince Edward, long regarded as one of the palace's quietest but most disciplined figures, was also rumored to support firmer administrative controls surrounding estate governance. Together, whispers suggest, they form the backbone of an emerging internal alliance increasingly referred to by commentators as the Heirs Accord. Though unofficial, the phrase began appearing more frequently among royal observers describing a growing bloc centered around William, Anne, and Edward figures allegedly united by a shared determination to restore stricter boundaries before the next reign officially begins. Caught in the center of the storm, however, was King Charles himself. Reports suggest the monarch struggled privately with the escalating conflict. Torn between loyalty to Camilla and mounting pressure from senior royals who feared institutional drift during his illness. Those familiar with Palace Dynamics described Charles as increasingly exhausted by the growing tension surrounding Sandringham, particularly because the dispute touched sensitive questions about succession, stewardship, and the monarchy's long-term direction. Several insiders claim the king initially hoped the situation could be quietly softened through private discussions. But by the time the Iron Protocol was activated, many within the palace reportedly sensed William had already moved beyond compromise. The future king had chosen containment over accommodation, structure over sentiment, duty over personal peace. Outside the palace, royal commentators began interpreting Sandringham less as an isolated family dispute and more as symbolic territory in a broader battle over royal authority itself. Newspapers, media insiders, and aristocratic circles increasingly framed the estate as the front line in a deeper institutional struggle unfolding inside the House of Windsor. Because beneath the silence surrounding access codes and administrative directives lay something far more consequential: the question of who truly controls the monarchy's future while the crown stands suspended between two reigns. And as speculation intensified, another layer of royal mystery quietly resurfaced from the shadows, one tied directly to Queen Elizabeth II and the private intentions she may have left behind before her death. Yet even as the palace tried to contain the fallout, whispers about Queen Elizabeth's final intentions began resurfacing, and those whispers threatened to make the crisis even worse. Long after her passing, Queen Elizabeth II still seemed to govern the monarchy from the shadows. At least, that is how many insiders describe the growing influence of old letters, forgotten directives, and private understandings now being quietly revisited amid the Sandringham conflict. Because according to royal whispers, William believed he was not merely defending an estate, he was defending the final architecture of his grandmother's legacy. As tensions surrounding Sandringham intensified behind closed palace walls, reports suggest conversations once buried deep within royal memory suddenly returned to the center of internal discussions. Former advisors, longtime household officials, and figures connected to Queen Elizabeth's final years were allegedly consulted in unusually discreet ways. Some insiders claim old correspondence tied to estate stewardship was quietly reviewed again, not because it carried formal legal power, but because it reflected the late Queen's deeply personal philosophy regarding royal continuity. Those who worked closest to Elizabeth reportedly understood how seriously she viewed the preservation of royal residences. Sandringham, Balmoral, and Windsor were never treated merely as inherited privileges. According to Palace Whispers, she believed these estates formed the emotional spine of the monarchy itself, anchors designed to outlive personalities, scandals, and even reigns. And in the eyes of many inside the institution, William had inherited not only her future crown, but her growing fears about what happens when royal boundaries begin to soften. Sources familiar with William's thinking claim he frequently returned to one principle that Queen Elizabeth allegedly repeated throughout her reign: duty before comfort. That phrase reportedly shaped his response to the Sandringham crisis more than any personal grievance ever could. While critics interpreted the restrictions as cold or excessive, insiders close to the Prince of Wales insist he viewed them as necessary. Containment measures during a period of institutional fragility. King Charles's ongoing health battles had already created quiet uncertainty throughout royal circles. Courtiers allegedly feared that prolonged instability at the top of the monarchy could encourage competing influence networks to expand behind the scenes. And according to several palace whispers, William became increasingly alarmed by what he reportedly viewed as growing informal authority surrounding Camilla's social circle after the coronation. Not necessarily through direct confrontation, but through gradual normalization. Invitations. Access. Quiet assumptions about future privileges. To William, insiders claim, those small shifts represented something far more dangerous than social tension. They represented the slow erosion of structure. Princess Anne reportedly shared those anxieties with unusual intensity. Various interpretations from palace insiders suggest she viewed the Sandringham dispute as part of a much broader institutional struggle already unfolding beneath the surface of royal life. Anne, shaped by decades of rigid discipline and unwavering service, allegedly feared the monarchy was drifting towards a softer model of governance where emotional relationships risked overpowering historic duty. According to whispers from within aristocratic circles, she privately encouraged William to think not as a son or stepson, but as a future sovereign responsible for defending the crown's long-term stability. Prince Edward was also rumored to support this philosophy quietly, believing that royal stewardship depended upon consistency, restraint, and clear chains of authority. Together, they worked together to achieve a common goal. They allegedly reinforced William's growing conviction that preserving peace at any cost could ultimately weaken the institution more than temporary conflict ever would. Caught between those pressures stood King Charles, increasingly described by insiders as emotionally exhausted by the widening divisions around him. Reports suggest the king desperately hoped to prevent the situation from spiraling into open internal warfare, while simultaneously managing the physical and emotional strain of his illness. Those familiar with palace dynamics claim Charles struggled deeply with the reality that the conflict involved two worlds he cared about equally: his loyalty to Camilla and his understanding of the institutio. Now burdened William now carried as heir to the throne. That emotional tension reportedly left the monarch isolated inside his own household, unable to fully satisfy either side without risking further damage to royal unity. Meanwhile, outside palace walls, public fascination with the Sandringham conflict exploded. Royal commentators, media insiders, and aristocratic observers became consumed by leaks, speculation, and whispered theories about hidden directives left behind by Queen Elizabeth herself. Every reported security adjustment, every unexplained scheduling change, every silence from Buckingham Palace only deepened the mystery further. Some interpreted the situation as a brutal family power struggle. Others viewed it as a necessary institutional correction during a dangerous transitional era. But inside the monarchy, according to palace whispers, the atmosphere had already shifted beyond repair. The old assumptions no longer held. The careful balance between personal loyalty and royal authority had fractured under the pressure of succession, illness, and legacy. And somewhere within that growing storm, insiders claim one final confrontation quietly emerged, an encounter that would be woe. ULD reportedly forced Prince William to reveal exactly how far he was prepared to go to protect the future of the crown. And as the monarchy drifted deeper into uncertainty, one final confrontation reportedly forced the future king to make his position unmistakably clear. For years, Prince William had been portrayed as cautious, disciplined, and patient, a future king, carefully avoiding open warfare inside the House of Windsor. But according to those now speaking in hushed palace tones, the Sandringham decision marked something entirely different. Not hesitation, not compromise, but a declaration that the next era of monarchy had already begun. What shocked palace insiders most was not simply the severity of the restrictions surrounding Sandringham, but the unmistakable confidence behind them. For decades, William had carefully maintained an image of restraint, often stepping back from public disputes while preserving the appearance of calm continuity around the crown. Even during some of the monarchy's most painful crises, he was frequently described as measured, controlled, and unwilling to inflame tensions unnecessarily. Yet reports suggest the events surrounding Sandringham transformed something inside him. According to sources close to royal operations, the future king no longer believed quiet patience alone could protect the institution he was destined to inherit. The pressures surrounding King Charles's illness, the growing uncertainty around succession, and the widening internal fractures inside the palace allegedly convinced William that a decisive line had to be drawn before confusion hardened into permanent instability. And once that realization settled in, insiders claim there was no turning back. Royal commentators quickly began interpreting the Sandringham move as far more than a private estate conflict. Across aristocratic circles and media discussions, the restrictions were increasingly framed as a defining leadership moment for the Prince of Wales, a signal that William was actively shaping the monarchy's future long before formally ascending the throne. Several palace insiders described the atmosphere afterward as one of reluctant recognition. Even those unsettled by the decision reportedly understood its deeper message. William was positioning himself not merely as heir, but as the institutional guardian of the crown's long-term survival. The symbolism surrounding Sandringham only amplified that perception. Because if one of the monarchy's most emotionally sacred estates could become the center of such an aggressive assertion of authority, then many believed a broader transformation inside the House of Windsor was already underway. For Camilla's allies, according to whispers from within royal circles, the firmness and speed of the restrictions came as a profound shock. Some reportedly believed William would eventually soften his position in order to preserve public unity around King Charles during such a fragile time. Others assumed long-standing personal sensitivities would prevent the future king from taking measures perceived as confrontational toward the current queen. But insiders now claim those assumptions underestimated how seriously William viewed the institutional stakes involved. To him, sources suggest, the Sandringham dispute had evolved beyond personalities long before the access protocols were activated. It became a battle over stewardship itself. A question of whether royal authority would remain anchored in disciplined continuity or drift into looser systems shaped by private loyalties and informal influence. And according to several interpretations circulating through palace corridors, William ultimately concluded that avoiding conflict could cause more damage to the monarchy than confronting it directly. Princess Anne reportedly understood that logic more than anyone. Palace whispers consistently describe her as fiercely supportive of the principle driving William's actions, even if the emotional consequences remained painful for the family itself. Those familiar with Anne's thinking claim she has long believed the monarchy survives only when the institution is placed above individual comfort, personal relationships, and temporary public opinion. The firm must survive above all else, one insider allegedly summarized when describing her private position during the Sandringham crisis. That philosophy reportedly shaped much of the quiet alliance forming around William in recent years. Prince Edward II was rumored to view stricter governance as necessary during a period when the monarchy's future appeared increasingly uncertain. Together, they represented what many commentators began describing as the old discipline reasserting itself against the softer culture that had graduated. Alley emerged around modern royal life. Meanwhile, King Charles reportedly continued searching for calm inside a palace consumed by tension. Sources close to the monarchy claim the king remained emotionally torn throughout the crisis, hoping to preserve family harmony while quietly acknowledging William's growing authority behind the scenes. That balancing act became increasingly difficult as public fascination intensified, and leaks surrounding Sandringham spread through royal media circles almost daily. Yet despite the turbulence, insiders suggest Charles also understood something deeply important was unfolding before his eyes. The transition between reigns had already begun not through ceremony, but through power. Silent power. Institutional power. The kind that reshapes ancient systems without ever needing public declaration. In the end, Sandringham became more than an estate at the center of palace controversy. It became a symbol of transformation during one of the monarchy's most fragile modern chapters. A reminder that beneath royal tradition lies an unforgiving reality. Every generation must eventually decide what it is willing to protect, what it is willing to sacrifice, how far it is prepared to go to preserve the crown for those who come next. And according to those closest to the unfolding crisis, Prince William had finally made his decision unmistakably clear. Because in the House of Windsor, power is rarely seized with shouting or spectacle, it is taken silently, behind guarded doors, where legacy matters more than loyalty, and duty always outlives emotion. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.